Good morning. Thank you so much. When you get old, they don't let you carry your chair. It's already happened. Like, dude, I'm too young for this. It's great to see everyone here today on this holiday weekend. If you're new to this area, welcome to winter in Wilmington. This is kind of what winter's like. I do want to, as we're wrapping up today, it's not just a series, but a season. We've been exploring and considering this concept of the activity of the gospel, what it means to become a servant, to understand what it means to live our lives in a posture where we give ourselves away, that although Jesus existed in the very form of God, he did not consider equality with God something to be held onto, but instead it fueled him to give himself away. And so today we're going to be wrapping that up. Before I do want to mention a couple things. Number one is I certainly want to express, and we've already done this on our campuses, just express my gratitude for all the men and women who have made the ultimate sacrifice in their families that allow us to experience the freedoms that we so readily enjoy today. And secondly, this is a big deal in our church, sort of a moment, because we've been in the building 15 years. The building in Wilmington we moved into in 2008. And as we were preparing, getting everything ready, part of in Grow Zone, which is our birth through 4-year-old, back through there, it's all locked down unless you have tags and keys, but there's a hallway that you exit out of. And we had these, a couple kids three kids specifically from Grow Zone. They were all 3 years old. They were all there. We took pictures of them, and there were these big poster size, and each of them held like a sign that said I. The second one had heart, and the third one said Grow Zone. So it's I love Grow Zone. And those pictures were really big, and they lined the hall for years going down that hallway. And so last night, put this picture up there. Last night, all 3 of those kids in those pictures all graduated from high school in this building at Coastal Christian High School. So they all stood there. That's Emily, Charles, and Anna. And Emily, if you notice there, has got her hand over her eye. But the reason is because they told her to hold the eye. And so she was holding the eye and holding her eye at the same time. I thought it was very clever. And so it just marks a moment. When we talk about generational responsibility, we're seeing these things happen all over our church. And part of what I want to address today comes from that mindset and from that sort of a level of intensity. I'll be very careful with how I talk about certain things today because so I have to read some of my notes so I'm very clear. I have more than I can possibly get in our time that we have together, but I want to give us a vision and a picture for what I believe God is doing in our church, what he longs for our church, and what might be required of us. Part of what I've been kind of leaking out and kind of underlaying is that we have to become the kind of people, we have to become the kind of church that is going to be demanded of us for the work that's ahead of us. There are things that God has for our church that's going to require something from us. And I want for us to recognize we're going to have to become a kind of people. That things can be required of us to do that. And part of my this whole exploration for me is, 10 years ago, 9 years ago, whatever it was, the questions began, God, why did you do this in our church? Like, why this? What are you doing in our church? And why did you do all these things? And what is this church for? What are we supposed to be doing? Are we supposed to just get bigger, just supposed to be cooler, just supposed to be more creative? Like, what are we supposed to be doing? And I began to just kind of go back and Lord, just in my own personal, can you give me fresh vision? Give me fresh vision for what you want of me and what you want of us. And, do I have fresh vision to lead our church into the next season that we are going? The answer is yes, I do. So don't go, well, Mike's leaving. He's not. I have very, very fresh vision for where we're going. And a lot of this centered on reading the Psalms and spending a lot of time in Isaiah, and particularly Isaiah 65. And Isaiah 65 is this visioning of a new heaven and a new earth. And in this place, God reveals to Isaiah that it's going to be a place where we build and we create and we contribute and we get to enjoy the contributions we make. We can enjoy the fruits of our labor, and the generations get to enjoy and continue to add to that in some beautiful, miraculous way. And this begins to give me this vision of what could be. And so we're gonna look at that in just a moment, but that's what began to brew. And what I began to realize, and part of what I want you to understand is when I talk about the activity of the gospel, I'm not just talking about did you ask Jesus into your heart or trust him as your Lord and Savior, whatever language you give to that, so that you can go to heaven when you die. I mean, is there a conviction in you that God's intention in this world is the renewal of all things? The more I read the Bible, the more I see that God, the message of the gospel, is that there is a day that is coming when every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And it's not it's where we're gonna be returned to the way things were intended to be, under his rule and his gracious reign. And there's gonna be renewal of heaven and earth. And the way we live in that, I can't even begin to imagine yet, but I want for us to get a vision for that and then to sort of grab that vision and say, this is what we need to be working on every single day. That's what I believe. And the radical hope that I'm asking us to sort of grab onto comes from believing that God actually wants to do this. God actually wants to do things in our world that will be meaningful and hopeful and helpful and reconciliatory and redemptive. And he's gonna use us to do it. I have a note in my Bible that I keep in the front. It just says this: God intends for the world to know his love, and he intends for it to happen through us. And we just have to decide how serious we are about God's intention for the world around us. So 2 things, and because I've got more than I can give you in this amount of time, I wanna put these 2 things up on the screen. You can take a picture of it, write it down. If you get this, you can go scroll your phone or do what you wanna do and check back later if you want to, but at least you'll know what I'm gonna be talking about today. But I want you to have this in front of you for where we're going over the next sort of season in our church. Number 1, is when I talk about the redemption of all things, we have to fundamentally understand that redemption is relational. It's relational. It isn't primarily political, it isn't primarily social, it isn't primarily economic, it's first and foremost relational. We have to get this, we have to believe this. You're not going to do redemptive work at a distance. You're not gonna do redemptive work and have clean hands. You're gonna get up to your elbows in the mess of our culture and our society if you're gonna do redemptive work. And number 2, the foundation of this effort has to be trust. It has to be trust. So those are the 2 kind of things that are going to be swirling around, and you'll hear this over and over again. And the reason this matters is because the essence of the fall, the way sin entered into this world, what happened was that the essence of the fall is that human beings took matters into their own hands. We decided we could do this ourselves. We wanted a life apart from God, right? This is what every toddler does, right? If you're a parent, you've seen this. Your kids are trying to do something, they can't do it. But you look at them and go, let me help you. They go, I can do it myself, right? It's the same thing. It's the same thing. And so the essence of the fall is that we have taken matters into our own hands. We've created a life apart from God's rule and his reign. We still have creative capacity. And we've created a life, a way of life apart from God's rule. And so then what we have to do, we have to create a way to govern our lives and our societies by something other than God's love in order to manage what is required for us to take care of what we have taken into our own hands. Does that make sense? I'm gonna say this again. We have to create a system to govern ourselves in order to take care of what we have taken into our own hands. And this has been sort of the human experiment since the beginning. There's laws and outlines laid out for God's people throughout the Old Covenant. There's also all kinds of other systems and ways of doing things throughout ancient history and throughout the ancient world and even up into the modern world. And we talk about this, and this is just sort of a rough sketch of how I think about this. And essentially, there's a system, and it's governed. It's some way in which we govern or control or operate within. The system that we use is the law. This system is designed to hold or to keep some form of value, something that we say this is the highest value that we have in our culture, what we want to experience. And then outside of that, there is sort of, let me make sure I draw this correctly. Outside of this value, there's the outcome. What do we want to experience as we live together as a people? And then when that doesn't happen, what is the justice? How do we adjudicate or make sure that it happens for all people or how we're gonna do this. So like in Rome, the system was the law, the value was Caesar is Lord. So everybody did what Caesar wanted. The outcome was that everybody did what Caesar says, and the justice was if you didn't do what Caesar says, they put you on a cross or they cut your head off, right? It's a clear system. So we live in a little less barbaric system than that, would y'all agree? Our system is like this. So we have this system that's governed by some law, legislation. The value in American culture, I believe, this is again my oversimplified sketch on this, is essentially the value of the individual right, the personal right. The outcome that we desire is that everybody have an equal shot, so we will call it fairness. And the way we adjudicate this or create a system of justice is by providing evidence and facts and proof that this is either happening or not happening. So that's my oversimplification of sort of how humans govern themselves. And this is sort of an idea of how we think about this in the United States of America. And so part of what we have to understand is that the fall, while we said we want a life apart from God, and so now we have to manage what that looks like in some capacity. We have to do this. What fundamentally gets broken in that arrangement is trust. And when trust is broken or undermined, which I think we could all agree, the nature, the tone of our system and our culture today is rooted in distrust, right? It's why when someone turns on their blinker, you don't turn. You wait till you're doggone sure that they're gonna turn, because you cannot trust people who use their blinkers or don't. You can't trust it, right? It's fundamental. It's fundamental. And when trust is broken or undermined, love disintegrates. And what I mean, I want to be really, really careful. By disintegration, I don't mean like the Death Star disintegrating a planet. Disintegration means that what was whole is now coming apart. There's a way of separation by which people and systems and classes and all kinds of things are divided and separated from themselves. And then we have to create a hierarchy of things to make sure that every separation gets the same shot at everything else, trying to pursue this outcome of fairness, that everybody has the same sort of shot. And what we are learning and exploring as a church is that the way of Jesus is fundamentally different. And that's what I want for us to see. It's fundamentally different. The posture of those who follow Jesus needs to be, we operate in a different world. We do not wage war the way the world does, but there's something else available to us. The way of Jesus is clearly modeled in self-sacrificing, others-oriented love. Read this quote a few weeks ago by Barbara Brown Taylor. She writes this: "By the grace of God, I am being mended. And God has called me to be a mender too. Since many threads are stronger than one, God has put me on a sewing team. And day by day, our job is to hunt the places where the world is ripped and to bend over the damage and to do what we can. Every good deed, every kind word, every act of justice and compassion tugs the torn edges closer together. And the truer our aim, the smaller our stitches, the longer the patch will hold. We've made plenty of rips ourselves, and some of the worst ones show evidence of having been mended many times before, but that does not seem to discourage anyone. Mending is how we continue to be mended. We would not trade the work for anything." Somehow, in this way that we are designed to live, we offer ourselves. We offer ourselves. And in doing so, we find something happens in us in return. This is what God, way He has designed things to be. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, there is the job description that God is reconciling all things to Himself, and He has given us the ministry of reconciliation. And right before He says that, this is what Paul writes for us. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 14 through 17. "For Christ's love compels us." What moves us is Christ's love. It's not oppression. It's not marginalization. It's not justice. It's Christ's love. What compels us is Christ's love, and out of that, we have to care about all of those other things. But what compels us is what has been done for us, what Christ has done, his love for us, to be moved by that. Because we are convinced that one has died for all and therefore all have died. He died for all that those who live should no longer live for themselves, that there's a distinctly different way for us to live. Should not live for themselves, but for him who died for us and who was raised again. And here's the implication in verse 16. So from now on, we regard no one from a worldly point of view. What is he saying there? What do we take from that? We have to learn to see differently. All of us. This is a lesson for all of us. And part of this is to start to think, and I began to look, and this has been sort of a 5, 6, 8, 9-year exploration for me trying to understand this. I've tried to write a lot about this, but when I think about sort of marginalization, you think about poverty, we talked about this last week, that what we ultimately are called to see, to not see people from a worldly point of view, is to see all the separations and divisions. But we are called to see something different. We are called to see the image of God. It's a matter of dignity. It's a matter of you and I being able to see into things what God sees and in ways that God sees, and then work to cultivate and to draw those things out. Dignity is simply the worth and the value of anything, but particularly in this case, the value of another person. You don't give dignity, you simply honor it. And in order to honor it, you have to see it, you have to notice it, and we have to learn how to do this. When we think about poverty and all the issues that we face in our culture, the despair of poverty has to first be met with the honor of dignity. These cycles of despair and shame and worthlessness that so many people live in, right? They're just conducive for the culture, for the systems. And I don't mean just political systems, I mean just the way of life, the culture. They get stuck in the patterns that get stuck there. And while there's certainly great economic need, that's a part of the strategy we need to develop. Poverty isn't first and foremost an economic problem, but rather it's a matter of dignity. It's teaching and helping people to believe that they have inherent and valuable or inherent worth. And someone has to work to honor this, and it always happens relationally. And this is where I think so much of the work needs to be done. And this is where I believe that the church is simply best positioned to do it. Like the thing that has helped me, the church, and I can only be responsible for our church. Our church is so well positioned to do it. Paul warns us not to be conformed to the patterns of this world, right? It doesn't just mean don't adopt loose moral standards, but it's about being careful not to depend on the world's systems to bring God's kingdom. It's more difficult and nuanced than we first assume. I have often grown up, perhaps you have, thinking that renewal could happen through this system. And I want to point this out. I've said this a bunch of times over the years. But regardless, when we think about individual rights and fairness and justice, both sides of our political coin, whether Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, progressive, or maybe you have worse names for them than that. But they each sort of hold up a direction or a trajectory. And on one side, what you typically have is a lot of emphasis on economic growth and development, and their call for a freedom of opportunity that nothing can thwart the opportunities available to you. You just have to keep your hands off of everything. And the other side, and this is a drastic oversimplification, the other side tends to value the freedom of self-expression. Nothing can stop you from expressing whoever it is that you want to be. And then there's some foundations underneath them, and then what happens is they just sort of lay out whatever issues you want on either side. It's all gonna come back to this. And the system of justice is using truth, using facts, sometimes true things, in order to justify or to support. It's always evidence. And that's not what truth is about, by the way. Truth is a person, right? Jesus said, I am the way, the truth. This is a different way of thinking about this. But it becomes a tool, a pawn, in whichever side's hands to get what they want, to ultimately try to attain some version of fairness for whatever thing they think is fair. This is sort of the way our world works. And in this, what happens is we are continually, right, just sort of split and divided, and it's more and more the same. And what this is a system, no matter which side you're on, that is fundamentally designed. And one more point. This is why I always say these are two sides of the same coin in the wrong system. Because that's what I mean by that. But here's why. Here's why why I believe that's true. Because what both of these systems are, even there are good things on the left and there are good things on the right. I know that it's hard for people to acknowledge, but there really are. But even in the good things, what it fundamentally is is about how do we create a system where every person can get what they are entitled to. And you either are entitled to it by the inalienable rights you receive in the Constitution, or you are entitled to it because those inalienable rights have been denied from you for some period of time because of some systemic or political, whatever it might be. Either way, it's designed to make sure that you can get what it is that you have a right to. And human beings are not designed to get. We are designed to give. And this is exactly the problem. This is what I mean when we put this up in the very first message of the series. That God's love is the only sufficient foundation for human relationships, right? And there are other foundations that we can build on, but I'm talking about for the depth of the things that we want. And then the second part of that is that God's love is not only the only sufficient foundation for human relationships, it's the only sufficient foundation for the fullness of human expression. That getting our way is not going to lead to the fullness of human expression. That's my point. Now you can agree with it, disagree with it. That's all the setup in here. I remember wrestling with this because let me move on. I don't have time for that. Yeah, I do. I remember because when it comes to this understanding, we have to start thinking about why it is that what it is that we're doing, what we're causing, what we're participating in, and how we can learn to be different. And there's a verse, the lady comes and washes Jesus' feet. He's at the home of Simon the leper. Interesting enough, Simon is given a name. This is always, the gospel writers have pulled this off because these are people who had no dignity or no worth or no status in the culture. And the scriptural writers, the gospel writers would give them a name, Zacchaeus or Lazarus, or in this case, Simon. And a woman comes and she washes his feet and she takes a very expensive bottle of perfume and breaks it open and washes Jesus' feet. And the people there were like kind of scoffing, like, oh my gosh, you could have taken that money and given it to the poor. And Jesus looks at them and says, the poor you will always have with you. I remember just thinking about this and going, why would Jesus say that? That feels so defeatist. Well, you can try, but it's always gonna be this way. Have you ever wondered that? And we use this, and as well, I tried, and it's just gonna, it just can't really help. They're just gonna be that way, and I'll just go back and do my thing. And the reason is, this wasn't a statement of fact, like, oh, it's always gonna be this way. This was a statement of concession, meaning that the world systems are always gonna work in such a way that prevent the fullness of human expression. Someone's gonna get at the expense of someone else. That's what it's always gonna be in this system until we learn how to live in another system. I think about this in our solution in a lot of ways. Is we spend, as a congregation, as a culture, we spend millions and millions of dollars to make sure that we live our lives insulated and isolated and distanced from any kind of poverty or problems. And what I'm beginning to wonder, what if the church spent millions of dollars to move right into the middle and begin to do some work on it? Like, what if we had that kind of vision for what God wants in and through our church? When we look at the world around us, it's very easy to complain and to take pot shots and listen to temptation to pull away and withdraw. My fantasy is to move to St. John and just, good luck to everybody else. And I've asked the Lord to do that. He has kindly said no. Because it's easy to recognize that things aren't like they should be. That's not hard for us to tell. We experience things that we are not intended to experience. And part of what bothers me, or the burden that I feel, is this disproportionately affects the next generation. We recognize that culture has placed increasing pressure on our children in many areas, exposing an entire generation to a way of life that is wholly inappropriate for their level of maturity. Wholly inappropriate. Elementary school kids should not have to have active shooter drills in their classroom. We all know this. Just hold on. We all know this. We know this. Active shooter drills to the exposure of sexuality that is just absolutely irresponsible. It is just irresponsible. And we have done this. This is all of us. We have dropped a weight on our children that just created rampant confusion and questions about their identity and their self-assurance that they simply aren't prepared to address and should not yet have to deal with. But here we are. So what are we gonna do? That's the question. This is where we are today. What I believe is as a calling for redemptive, to bear God's redemptive promise, to hold his redemptive promise, we believe that our church should be distinctly different. And it should be a different experience for our children when they are here and they are in our place. Those pressures, we should be lifted while they're under our care. We believe that not only exists in our place, but it should exist everywhere that we are. Whenever you and I are in these places, we should work and live to bring this kind of way of life to the world around us. And just, it's so easy to get overwhelmed. When Jesus taught us to pray, he said, "Our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name." What's next? Thy kingdom come, thy will be done right here the way you have always intended for it to be. Right here. The reason I get, kind of just moved by Isaiah 65, because it just gives a picture. Here's the vision of the new heaven and new earth. I'm gonna make my people a joy. My people will be a joy and a delight to the world around them. That's all in there. Then in verse 21, it says this: they will plant houses or build houses and dwell in them. They will plant vineyards, and they will eat of their fruit. No longer will they build houses and others live in them, or plant and others eat. They're not gonna be exploited. There's just not gonna be this constantly using people to get this from me. For as the days of a tree, so will be the days of my people. This is a metaphor, obviously, right? It's not telling you to be a tree. But there's a stability and a sourcing and a fruitfulness. My people will be this way. And my chosen ones will long enjoy the work of their hands. Can you imagine that what you do with your hands and with your life, you will actually find great enjoyment. It will bear fruit. It will bring nourishment and beauty to the world around you. And this last verse gets me every time, verse 23. They will not labor in vain, nor will their children be doomed to misfortune. We won't keep doing this to the generations behind us. God, I swear I wasn't gonna do this. Y'all, there is something that can be done. Can you imagine a world where that's the case? And the answer is like, oh my gosh, there's so much to be done. But here's the other question. Could you imagine a moment where that's the reality? It's like, well, yeah. In this moment it can be this, and maybe in this moment it can be. Now, when we start to get that kind of vision, it renews us to what we can actually be a part of and the meaningful work, real meaningful work that's in front of us, that's available to us. I think of this as redemptive activity. It's not redemptive plans, it's not redemptive strategies, it's redemptive activity. It's the way in which you and I live our lives. And the way I define it is this: redemptive activity is anything and everything that we do that brings God's intention to the world in which we live, on earth as it is in heaven. It's anything and everything we do. Seeing someone's dignity and acknowledging it, right? Listening honors someone's dignity, right? If you're a parent and you have teenagers, I don't mean any disrespect to teenagers, your teenagers are gonna say things that make no sense, right? It's gonna happen. And kids, just to be fair, I get it. Your parents sometimes say things that don't make any sense either, so we get all that. But listening to each other has a way of honoring and validating something about that person's perspective and recognizing that. And yeah, when you're 12 and 13, you shouldn't have to do that, but guess what? This is kind of where we are, and yes, you do have to learn how to do that. But listening to do this for another person, calling someone by name, dignifies them. It honors their dignity. I went to a funeral a few years ago for a friend of mine's father, and one of the things that he would always say, he'd say, everybody has a name and most people want to be called by it. You ever wonder, like right whenever we have the shootings and a lot of in social justice, particularly where it's young African Americans who are shot and killed, typically men and women, but the mantra that always comes out is say their name. Do you know why? Because it's acknowledging worth and value and dignity of a person to say a name. I walked downtown, I was down there a couple months ago, and a guy comes up to me, he's obviously unsheltered, right? He wants food, and you get that little pit in your stomach, and I looked over, my daughter was with me, and we had something we could offer to him. And so when I got it, what I did, I rolled down the window, and I said, hey, can you tell me your name? And he said, yes. And I can't fix him and all the things you want to do, and you go, oh, how can we give you a job? I can't do that. What I can do is I can offer him this and say, David, I hope you get what you need today. I can't solve his problems, but in that moment, perhaps I can bring a little bit of dignity by looking him in the eye and calling him by name. It's redemptive activity. Trusting another person honors their dignity because it recognizes that perhaps they'll live up to your expectation. They'll do what they say they're going to do. You're sort of giving them something about themselves. It's such a tangible and tactile thing. But I think this has to frame the way that we look at redemption. Dignity serves as the lens through which we will see redemption. And it starts with us seeing and recognizing a person, a name, a story. And this is why it differs from solutions and why it's different from this system, because it's redemptive activity. We're not likely to end the chaos in our culture, because more than likely when you start thinking about all the things, you'll immediately think, I don't do enough, or I need to do more, or I don't have time to do all these things. But I want to be very clear, there are lots of things that we can do. There are lots of things that we can do. Right? Every single day, we can, rather than trying to find significant things to do, we can start and try to find significance in the things that we already do, the things that you do right in front of you. If you're a mom, right, you have to change diapers, or a dad, let's be fair. And there are a lot of times when you're working and you're with your infants and you're with your small children, and it feels like sometimes that you're not as efficient, you're not as effective as you used to be. And if this weren't the case in your home or in your life, you would be able to do more. And you have to start to recognize that changing a diaper and tending to this little one who is in your care is creating value and breathing worth and breathing dignity into who this little person will become. The attachment, the trust, all the things you're gonna learn in those moments. All these things matter. When you serve in Grow Zone, right, you're not just caring for a little one, you're helping them develop, but you're also providing dignity to the time that the couple, the family wants to spend to be in a service. And it all begins to work together, right? Listening, we already talked about, can value another person. Having a job can be an act of contribution and offering, right? To steward what you have been entrusted. Someone has asked you and they're paying you to do something with your hands or your mind. And you offer that. This is why I think it's brilliant. Like Paul said, we do, work, do whatever you do it as unto the Lord. Because there's a different way for us to offer ourselves. Cleaning your kitchen as an act of stewardship, right? Depositing your paycheck, which I guess I don't do anymore, just kind of goes in and out somewhere. We're gonna talk about that in the fall. But it's an act of receiving. And it's subtle things, but we have to learn. Do not regard others in the world around you, what you do, as the world does any longer. We have to learn to see in a different way. As we begin to learn how to do this, right, we find his image being born in us, and then we find his image in us coming to bear on the world around us. This is why we define service this way. This is the definition we've used. That serving is both offering ourselves to another for their good and contributing to the good of the world around us. And here's the opportunity. The world needs so much good, doesn't it? I mean, it just needs so much good. We're not likely to end the chaos. I don't watch the news much, but I've been watching it. I'm looking at what's going to happen in this next election. We're not likely to end the chaos. I don't care who you're for, it's just going to be chaos. But what we can do together is to learn to navigate the chaos faithfully and full of hope, full of radical hope that actually believes that God wants to do something about his promise and is going to use us to do it. It requires us to see and it requires us to act. Now, I'm a systems guy. I love systems. I love organizations. I love strategies. I love all those things. And I'll tell you, my confidence in a lot of those things is not very high. But I am more hopeful and more optimistic than I have been in a long time. I'm more motivated and moved because while I cannot solve every problem, in fact, I can't solve most of the problems, what I can do is every day I can wake up and try to find a way to honor something of God's heart and something of God's design. And if I can learn to see those things and contribute to them, right? One of our mantras is every choice you have, you can either add to the chaos or contribute to healing. But if I can bring myself and see something and offer those things in those moments, then perhaps God himself will magnify those efforts as seeds to plant something of his goodness that will bloom in some way, somehow. That somehow whatever I offer, God might take it and do something far more, right? We're like a tree. It just seeds, and whatever blooms or plants, we're gonna just keep offering and doing this redemptive activity in all these different places. And trusting in this reality has given me more courage and more hope. Not that things are gonna be automatically different, but perhaps things might be different in this moment with this person. And think about this. There's a lot of us in these rooms. If we can be different in a whole bunch of moments, spread throughout all the places where we show up, then maybe there's this subversive, right, unstoppable, redemptive activity, backed by God's promise, by the way, redemptive activity that begins to work underneath and within all the other things that are gonna seek to divide and disintegrate the world in which we live. So here's what I would ask you to do. Then I want to read this, kind of close with this poem, prayer / I don't want you to go, what's all the big ideas? Some of you are working on the big ideas, and listen, we need people working on big ideas. We need great politicians. We need great lawyers. We need great people who work in all these systems. Please do not misunderstand me. This is not a critique. It's an observation. But we need people who are in those positions with an eye for something else. And we need people in every part of our culture with an eye for something else. And I want you to think about, I want you to spend some time and say, Lord, what is it that's in front of me? Not what big thing, what's in front of me? How can I breathe value and worth in every little place where I already am, I've been listening to this, it's a song, but it's a poem on kind of repeat for the last little while. And it's an older song, and it goes like this. All the love in the world is right here among us, and hatred too. And we must choose what our hands will do. Where there is pain, let there be grace. Where there is suffering, bring serenity. For those afraid, help them be brave. Where there is misery, bring expectancy. And surely we can change. Surely we can change something. That's really all you have to do. Little bit of something every single day. Can't imagine the world being different, but man, I can imagine this moment being different. If I can offer something to that and of that in that moment, perhaps, God will take that. It will become a part of his desire, his heart to redeem and to renew all things. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Father, would you help us? It's easy to complain. It's easy to get jaded. It's easy to be cynical. It's easy to want to move to St. John. Father, you have called us and placed us. Would you help us become the kind of people, collectively, the kind of people that would be up for the call that you have on our church for this cultural moment. Father, would you continue to give us vision and empower us and use us in ways that we cannot yet even imagine? And so, Father, I thank you that you are good. I thank you that you are faithful. And so, Father, I just ask you to help us to trust you in everything and to bring something about your desire and your heart into our own lives, and then out of our lives into the world around us, every moment, every circumstance that we find ourselves in. And I ask all this in your Son, Jesus, who is our King. Amen.